Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode in the Flat Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Kill, joined this week by Jess. This is going to be our first instant reaction podcast of the year. We thought it'd be appropriate with, Texas, Alabama, really one of the more marquee matches of the year, kicking us off here week two. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with that great matchup down there in Alabama, Tuscaloosa. I think in the preseason, we kind of predicted this would happen, that Texas would win. I kind of backed off that prediction myself because I thought maybe Alabama got it together. They didn't have as many penalties in the first game. The offense was clicking. But again, that's why it's always hard to tell with that first week. You never you play those cupcake schedules at the beginning, and you don't know if your team's actually good or not. And so I think some teams found out how good they are this week. But yeah, no, this was a really good performance by Texas. Quinn Ewers had 349 yards, 3 touchdowns, really spread the ball around. I think, Sanders had 5 receptions to 114 yards. The transfer from Georgia, Mitchell, had 3 for 78 and 2 touchdowns, and Xavier Worthy had 5 for a touchdown and 75 yards. So spread the ball around. The offense looked like we thought it could in the offseason. I think they just did. Well, we talked about the podcast. Maybe they didn't do their whole game plan last week against Rice, but they came out firing, and it looked really good. I mean, they kind of just controlled this game from start to finish. I think only at one point where Alabama took the lead in the, I think maybe the fourth quarter there, that felt like maybe this was going to be, Alabama's game to win. But what came back to bite him is what we've been talking about since the offseason is the quarterback play. Jalen Moreau, while he's a great athlete, it can make some really long, deep throws, which, but they're kind of like fast for Feeman. You're ever going to get something really good out of it or something bad, and this is what you got. 14 to 27, so almost about 50% completion, 255 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So overall, this not a great performance by the quarterbacks, and that's what we felt was the weakness of Alabama going in. But they were really undisciplined. If you remember last year, they had 15 penalties against Texas again. I think where they had like 8 or 10 penalties in this game, where it really just cost them some yardage and kept Texas drive alive a few times. So, Jess, what was your overall impressions? Is this more telling to you for Texas or Alabama?
I mean, it was pretty telling for both. You kind of hit the nail on the head there. This came down to the difference in quarterbacks. Quinn Ewers had, I believe, like the best game of his college career, and Jalen Moreau, great athlete, not a great passer. At the end, towards the mid to end of the third quarter, when Alabama took that 16-13 lead, it felt like all the momentum had shifted, but there were a couple instances where Alabama had the ball. They had forced Texas into a 3-and-out or just, a quick punt. They had all the momentum, and they get into like these situations where they need to throw the ball, and Moreau, he just was missing some easy throws. He's missing his running backs out of the backfield that could have made it like a third and manageable. They get into like a 3rd and 4, and he's just missing the guy on the quick slant or whatever. It's high, it's out of reach. And that's the difference. Quinn Ewers was able to hit those easy little layup passes, and he was also then able to go over the top. Texas really utilized their weapons. It just looked like they had, the better pieces overall on offense. They had way more weapons. Sanders to Worthy to Mitchell. Quinn Ewers was hitting everybody, and they were getting these big chunk plays. They were able to go over the top, and that was the difference. Ewers was the better quarterback, and Texas actually did a pretty decent job at keeping Alabama's running game intact. They need to work on some tackling, but they had a bunch of situations where they could have sacked, Milroe, or at least gotten the running back in the backfield. But I don't know if it's more about Milroe and the Alabama running backs, or Texas needs to just wrap. But at the end of the day, Texas was the better team last night or yesterday. Well, yeah, no, last night, depending on where in the country you are.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, I thought they were, and what do you think the ceiling is for Texas? Are they? Are they a playoff team? Are we thinking playoff for Texas now at this point?
I think if they can go undefeated, they'll have a decent shot at the playoff. But I don't think they're going to be the kind of team that is allowed one loss and still gets in. Like if Bama is able to go undefeated and wins the SEC championship, they're going to find a way to get Bama in. If Texas loses a game and then wins the Big 12 championship, they're not going to let Texas in. I don't think. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about, is Texas for real, or is this just a weak Alabama team? And I think a lot of people are going to say this was a weak Alabama team.
Yeah, no, and I think the one thing I've learned about the playoff committee though is if you beat Alabama, you usually get a lot of leeway on doing anything else because they feel like that's the best thing you can ever do is just to beat Alabama. So,
More of
um,
an interesting kind of thing for me, though, is when it comes to Texas, with teams like Texas, USC, and FSU, how much wiggle room
yeah,
is the committee going to allow there? Because like a one-loss Michigan, conference champ, or a one-loss Alabama conference champ, or I mean, none of us are expecting Georgia to lose at all until possibly the playoff, but in a hypothetical one-loss Georgia SEC champ, you know, they're going to get the benefit of the doubt. I don't think USC, FSU, Texas, I don't think those teams are going to get that same benefit of the doubt.
yeah, I agree. I mean, especially ACC is really down this year. The Big 12's kind of up and down. Pac-12 seems
Pac-12 looks like
strong.
the best conference in college football right
Yeah, I
now.
mean, this year they just happen to have all the quarterbacks, but
Yeah.
I feel like with the Pac-12 they're going to like this, taking each other out as the schedule gets tougher throughout the year. So, but yeah,
Well,
no, we'll keep
2
an eye
weeks
on
we get
Texas.
USC, Colorado, I think. Week 4, week 5 is when this season really looks like it's going to start kicking off with all of those marquee matchups.
Oh yeah, no, it's gonna be good, especially some matchups you didn't even think we're going to be good, like all these Colorado matchups. Now, they're all looking like they're going to be good. But we'll talk about Colorado and Nebraska in a bit. But I feel like I think it was somewhat more Nebraska for me with the turnovers and the terrible offensive play.
Mhm.
But yeah, we'll talk about that one. All right, let's move on to the next game. I thought this was an interesting game. Notre Dame, North Carolina State. Um, it was a weird game. They had a over 2 hour lightning delay in this game, where there was water pooling on the field. The video board got struck by lightning, and got knocked out. It's the first game that they use this new video board too, but I think they were able to fix it. But it was interesting because this is the first time that Notre Dame kind of got punched in the mouth this year because of the competition, and they had to figure out a way to counterpunch North Carolina State. For the first quarter, it was 3-0. It was a defensive struggle, and then they went to the delay. After the 2 hour delay, Autry Estimate broke out an 80-yard touchdown run here to kind of open this game up, and then Sam Hartman has struggled, and he got knocked around a little bit in this game, fumbled the ball once. But he was able to kind of get his composure, throw for 286 yards, 4 touchdowns. Ended up with a really good performance. Really started finding the tight end more in this game to go along with the running backs and the receivers. And the defense, played strong. There was a garbage touchdown added in here. But, for the most part, Notre Dame just took the second half, took it over, won by 21 points. And now they have Central Michigan next week. But then the big game coming up in 2 weeks is it's Ohio State. So with that being said, just have you seen enough between this and Ohio State's performance at the quarterback to feel like there's a chance here at Notre Dame can win that game when they come to South Bend?
Yeah, no, Hartman has looked poised. He looks like easily one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I've been more impressed by Ohio State's defense in these first 2 weeks than I have been their offense. That being said, they did have a good showing. They finally decided, hey, you know what? Let's try passing, having a vertical offense with these phenomenal weapons we have. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do against Notre Dame. But more so on the Notre Dame front, this was a good test. I liked what I saw. They were able to hang in even when they got kind of punched in the mouth, and NC State just wasn't going away until that fourth quarter. They were able to force 3 interceptions from Brennan Armstrong. So, that was a big difference there in the turnover differential. Hartman had the fumble, but, it's still 3-1 in that regard, if I remember correctly. I forget if
Yeah.
NC State had one more turnover outside of that. I don't think they did.
Yeah, I think it was just 3.
Yeah, so if Notre Dame, one of the things that I've really liked from Notre Dame the past 2 weeks is that they have been incredibly efficient. They're not having these constant, like, 2 to 3 yards here and then just a 40-yarder randomly. They are methodical. They've been able to control the game. Hartman is, again, as I said, he looks poised. He looks comfortable. You guys have all the pieces. I don't know if this is the year you can get over the top, but this is the first year, well, mainly because Georgia exists.
Yeah.
But this is the first Notre Dame team that I've seen in a few years where I'm like, they could hang with Ohio State, Michigan. They could hang with these, tougher teams here, and with Alabama having a down year, and you never know what's going to happen, if maybe Notre Dame gets the nod over FSU, because if Notre Dame goes undefeated, chances are they're going to have more impressive wins than Florida State. And if
Yeah.
Notre Dame goes undefeated, that means USC's got a loss. So this definitely feels like the year you guys could make it back to the playoff.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is in years past, they played hard and they really just had to out scheme teams and try to control the game with the offensive line and running game. But then when the big games came, they weren't able to run the ball. Here, what I liked about this in the new offensive coordinator, Jared Parker, what I liked is that at the beginning, they just could not run the ball on this North Carolina State defense. So they started figuring out different ways to get the tight ends involved and different ways to use different running backs, and kind of open that game. And then by the end, they were able to wear out that state defensive line and start running the ball more. And that's what you got to do against these really good teams. You got to figure out, you can't just hitting the wall. When in the past, I feel like they would just keep hitting the wall, thinking things are going to happen. And if you have a quarterback that can open it up, it makes it harder for you to stack the defensive line like that. So definitely, yeah, it was definitely a pressure performance. So I'm interested in that game in 2 weeks. Ohio State, we'll talk a little bit about them just quickly. They beat Youngstown, I think 35-7. I think Kyle McCord, look good. But what I did not like about the Ohio State strategy here is they took him out for a lot of this game to put in Devin Brown, the backup quarterback, who looked not great, to be honest. I know on this podcast, I've said that what I was hearing is that Devin Brown was playing better in training camp, and looked like they were, a lot of people thought he should be the starter. They put him in for a lot of this game, and he struggled a lot. He had some good moments, but I just don't feel like at this point he's better than Kyle McCord. And the reason I say they made a mistake in this is I wonder, like, should they have been getting Kyle McCord more ready? He hasn't played a lot. He played it, really, his second start was in his first game, and then this is the second game he hardly plays, and now they have one game to really get ready for Notre Dame. Felt like me, I would want to get him out there, get everything, get used to everything, see a lot of different things the defense could bring for this game and next game. Maybe at the end you can have Devin Brown come in for a couple drives, but I just feel like they used them too much. What do you think in that strategy? Do you feel like, was it the right strategy just to see what you got in Devin Brown in this game, or should they have just kind of ran with Kyle McCord if that's who they think their quarterback one is?
I think this is the issue with the big dogs scheduling all of these cupcakes so early in the season. I mean, Indiana isn't a cupcake, but they're a Big Ten team. They got them in that first week, but then they go to then they have Youngstown State and Western Kentucky, both at home. And when you're Ohio State, you're not gonna learn what you've got with Kyle McCord against Youngstown State and Western Kentucky. You're just not. He's going to be going into this Notre Dame game, and even if he's got all these reps under his belt, that's going to be a whole nother level of football game. It's playing as much as I'm sure Western Kentucky and Youngstown State fans, they love their team. Obviously those guys on those teams are better at football than you and I ever were, Tony. Like
Yeah.
we couldn't walk on at those schools. We couldn't walk on at a Division III program. But they're not Marvin Harrison Jr. They're not Emike Ibuka. They're not any of these guys on Ohio State. Like it's just a different level. I mean, you see that when Ohio State plays a team like Rutgers. You know, Rutgers might be a joke to a lot of people, but they're still bringing in these 3-star guys. Like the there's a difference between Wisconsin and Ohio State. And there's a reason every year we say, in the Big Ten, it's going to come down to Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. Those
Yeah.
teams have just completely separated themselves from the rest of, the conference. And even on what we might expect to be a down year for Ohio State, they're still easily one of the best teams in the entire country. So, if they were to have played Alabama in week 2, and you have Kyle McCord in there, and you really get to see what he's capable of. This again, we might think this is a down year for Alabama, but again, still that's one of the best teams in the country, no questions asked. I mean, they
Yeah.
still got like 5 to 6 first round level guys on that roster. So I think it was a weird decision, but I also don't think they were going to get much more out of McCord. Like, what were they going to see? He went over the top. He was able to hit Marvin Harrison Jr. for a couple big plays. He was able to hit Ibuka for a couple big plays, and they got all they needed to out of him. And there was no way Youngstown State was going to be mounting anything resembling a comeback. They got that one touchdown, and that was it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna be interesting because I know, like, I was, watching Notre Dame. Obviously, they hadn't really played anybody, and so this was the first time. Like I said, they got hit in the mouth. They had to figure out how to counterpunch. What you got, and so they're lucky because they have Sam Hartman, who's seen it all in 5 years. Where Kyle McCord, you might throw a lot of different things at him, and it's on the road, South Bend. It's his first road game, and how is he going to respond? You don't know because you haven't played that level anywhere near that level of competition. So I am going to be interested to see how that looks. So that
I'm
should be a
also
fun.
interested to see if they're going to continue maybe doing the same thing that Texas did against Rice. Like they're not looking to throw a whole bunch of their more advanced stuff
Yeah,
at the wall here until, Notre Dame because they don't want to
yeah,
reveal everything that they got there. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on that Ohio State Notre Dame game, and that's going to be very telling for both those teams. Like, who are
yeah. No,
they?
I mean, yeah. Who are they? Who kind of team are they? Are they playoff teams or not? So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. All right. Next up, I want to talk about another Big Ten team. That's Wisconsin. They lost 31-22 to Washington State. This is the second year in a row they've been ranked 19th and got beat in upset fashion by Washington State. Um, Cam Ward has this offense rolling for Washington State as quarterback. He went 20-32 for 212 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also ran 17 times for 43 yards. And so they just kind of kept control of this game. I think at one point it was like 24-3, 24-6, something like that. So they really controlled this game. And then Wisconsin made a furious comeback, but they couldn't quite get over the hump to win this game. I've heard obviously there's a new coaching staff, Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, and they're trying to run some form of the air raid. They're calling it the dairy raid, is what I've read that they're calling it. And so far, it's been a mixed bag. They did put up a respectable score last week, 38-17 over Buffalo, but a lot of that was from the rushing game, for 298 yards rushing. They only ran 69 yards this game, so that they were able to really get the good round running there. So, any thoughts here on this? Quick thoughts here on Washington State, Wisconsin.
I was not impressed with Wisconsin. Cam Ward, he looked good, but we already know, like we mentioned earlier, it's like the Pac-12 has all of the best quarterbacks,
Yeah,
like except for Hartman and May. Like, it's ridiculous the quarterback depth that the Pac-12 has. And again, I feel like that was kind of the deciding factor there. Like who's got the better quarterback? Ward was doing it all for him. He had a total of 255 all-purpose yards, 2 touchdowns, and at the end of the day, if you've got a balanced attack there, for between rushing and passing, you're going to be really hard to defeat. That sounds like really basic analysis, but at the end of the day, that's true. If you can just do whatever you want, there's a lot less pressure on the quarterback to try and have to make plays. And the defense doesn't know what you're going to throw at them. You have all these play action options, the RPOs. If you can just keep the defense on their back foot as reactive rather than just them attacking you, they have to respond to everything that you're doing. And Washington seemed like they had Wisconsin in that situation for pretty much the entire first half in particular. Wisconsin did have that comeback a little bit in the third quarter. I think it was a 13-0 Wisconsin's favor in the third quarter, but they just couldn't quite get that last bump to get them over the hump there in Washington State. The Nakia Watson had a 1-yard run with 5.5 minutes remaining, and that was just it. Wisconsin, they had 3 different running backs go for at least 7 carries, and the guy who had the fewest carries was Braylon Allen. He had 7
I don't
carries.
know. I don't understand how they're using him. It just feels like he's lost in this offense. He was outstanding the last couple of years. Now he's just lost in this offense. I'm not quite sure what's going on
Are
there.
they doing like a whole running back by committee thing? Like there's no, like if you got a guy like what everyone was saying Braylon Allen is, there's no reason that, Chez Mellusi needs 12 carries. Tanner Mordecai gets 10 carries. And then Braylon Allen gets 7 carries. And it's not like any of them were really doing much. I mean, Chez Mellusi averaged 4.1 a carry, but Mordecai and Allen did barely average 2 to 3 yards per carry. I don't know what their plan is there. You'd think Allen was one of, if not their best playmakers, especially what everyone was projecting him to be coming into this season. So I have no idea what they're doing there, but I was much more impressed with Washington State there.
Yep, and I'm very angry about this. Obviously, I had Braylon Allen in my Heisman draft, and he is doing absolutely nothing. So
I was debating in our Heisman draft going as Shedeur over Hunter, but I thought, Hunter's getting like this 2-way thing, but Shedeur is looking
none of us picked Shedeur, so
no one could have projected that he was going to be on pace to break Colorado's single season passing yard record by over 2,000 yards. I mean, he's got like 1,000 yards passing, 10 touchdowns, no turnovers through 2 games. And again, it's not like Nebraska and TCU are like cupcakes. They may not be some. It might not be some Texas Alabama level matchup, but it's better than Youngstown State,
right? Yeah,
or Ball State, or Grambling. Sorry to those schools.
Yeah, no, definitely. And SEC some SEC teams had a nice day yesterday with those teams. So, all right, going to keeping it back 12 here. Utah won an ugly game, I would say, 20-13 over Baylor. If you look at the combined stat box for these quarterbacks, obviously Cam Rising was still out in this game. I think they're talking he could probably make it back by the UCLA game. They have Weber State next week, which is a FCS team, so they'll be able to beat them, and then have hopefully Cam Rising back because they definitely need quarterback play. They're obviously the starters or co-starters or whatever you want to call them. Bryson Barnes, 6 of 19 for 71 yards. Nate Johnson, 6 of 7 for 82 yards. That his passing game wasn't going. Luckily, they had Jackson, the running back, 19 carries, 129 yards. But the biggest thing for me in this game is that Utah's defense is still just one of the better defenses in the country. When they needed stops, when they needed turnovers, they got them against Baylor. I mean, obviously, offenses did not have it today, but that defense was able to shut down the other team, get them back into it. I think at one point it was 13-3, 13-6, Baylor, and Utah put the clamps down on the defensive side and won this game. So, are you worried about Utah? Do you think Cam Rising is going to coming back from ACL injury in January, you think he's going to be ready to lead them to some wins in the Pac-12 and some of the more tougher teams?
I am worried. I'm not, this whole dual. I've never been a fan of a whole dual quarterback system. If you have multiple quarterbacks, you don't have any quarterbacks. I forget who said that, or it was a very similar quote. I forget the exact one. I think I got it, but fans message us. Let me know the actual quote there. um, but if you're not letting a guy get into a rhythm and really establish himself, then that was part of the issue that you were talking about with the Ohio State situation. Like you need a guy, you need him to develop a rhythm, you need him to feel comfortable in the system, and you're not going to be doing that by like constantly taking him out or replacing him. Like you do one drive, this guy does the other, then you get two drives and this guy gets another drive. Like you need to keep him in there and see what you have. And you had Nate Johnson, who went 6 for 7 for 82 yards, but then he also had 11 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown. So clearly, you guys were getting a little bit from him in the rushing game as well. 6 for 7 there is a bit more efficient than 6 of 19. But Barnes also then, he had 6 of 19 passing for 71 yards and a pick, but then he also had 8 carries for 21 yards. So it's like neither one of them is truly separating themselves, it feels like. And it doesn't feel like the system is really letting them. I'm hoping at the very least if when they get Rising back, he's going to come in there and at the very least solidify the passing game, because they've got a good running game, it seems like. And if their defense is clicking, then the quarterback's the most important position. But are they really going to be able to hold out? When do they have the UCLA game? You said that he's a
So yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Who do
Yeah.
they play next week?
Weber State. So they
Yes.
FCS team, they'll get the win there with these quarterbacks. But then,
So
yeah, you got to hope that Cam Rising comes in there and just gets the passing game going, gets the tight ends involved, things like that, like they've done in years past.
yeah, no. So if they, but then what is he going to look like when he comes back is a big question.
Yeah, exactly.
So how long until he's back and feeling really comfortable? Is there going to be mental toll with that injury? There's a lot of questions there, and my confidence in them has wavered.
Yeah.
It's not gone, especially if he can come back and be good. But
I feel like, come back ACL, you're not quite yourself. I mean, like Michael Penix, that year after his ACL, he just wasn't quite himself.
exactly.
The year after, he started playing.
You really gotta.
Yeah. I mean, that's just like what, January, so it'll be what, 9 months, maybe closer, like around 9 to 10 months. That's just not a long time for ACL injury for me. It's gonna be tough, but hopefully he can come back and do it, because they definitely need him to. All right. Next up, I called this upset on the podcast. It didn't happen, but Ole Miss beat Tulane 37-20. I feel bad for Tulane in this game. Michael Pratt was not able to play their quarterback. That was why I was kind of basing my my prediction on it. And for a while, I actually thought they were going to be able to pull this off, as they were winning at one point 17-7, 17-10 at halftime. But they just didn't have enough the offensive firepower. Their backup, Kate Horton, had a decent game, but 15 of 37. I mean, that's really bad completion. 231 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. They didn't get what they usually get from Michael Pratt. So they really didn't get this offense going. So I feel bad from there. Well, I'll say, though, I am impressed with Ole Miss, because I've been wondering about their quarterback situation, but Jackson Dart has seemed to really take this on. He did have a wonderful stat-wise, but 17-27, 267 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Spencer Sanders, it seemed like he got in for a series or 2 at quarterback as well, but really I think Jackson Dart has won this job, pretty much hands down. So they have a little bit more momentum going into SEC play. Any takeaways from you on this one?
Yeah, I think if Tulane had their starting quarterback in, we're talking about this a little differently.
Yeah, I agree.
But I was impressed with, this is kind of what I was saying a little bit about Notre Dame. They came out, they got punched in the mouth. This wasn't going to be, oh, Tulane doesn't have their starting quarterback. We got this. You know, it wasn't like that for them. They came out, they got punched in the mouth, and they were able to be like, oh, okay, that was your best shot. All right, now here's ours. They were resilient. They didn't deviate too much, from I would suspect what their game plan was. They came out there, they executed, they got some turnovers. It was just a well-rounded game from Ole Miss. They went down 17-7. They didn't let that, deter them. Came out in the second half and just completely dominated them 27-3 in the second half.
Yeah.
So I'm impressed. I still don't think they're really going to be able to compete with the true upper echelons of the SEC. I'm not seeing them really going to be able to compete with Bama or Georgia or LSU, but they've definitely established them. I definitely think they're going to be in that upper mid tier of the SEC this
Yeah.
year. I think it's going to really come down to, does Tennessee find their footing? They did not look good yesterday.
No, they did not.
Alabama, does Milroe, get more comfortable as a passer as the season progresses?
I wonder if the SEC's down this year. If you kind of think about it, there's Georgia, but then you have LSU with the loss to FSU, Alabama the loss to Texas. You have a lot of other teams that are just like kind of there, but they're not upper echelon. They're not low. They're just kind of middle teams. And I do wonder, like, is SEC down more than they usually are, especially like with like quarterback play and things like that.
It definitely feels that way this year. It definitely feels like there's, just something missing from the SEC that's normally there. I mean,
Yeah,
that could just, but I mean, if you really think about it, these past few years, you know, it really has just kind of been either Georgia or Alabama.
yeah,
A&M has been projected to be really good, but they haven't lived up to that. Every now and then it feels like Ole Miss or Mississippi State kind of sort of gets good, but then they get knocked back down to earth by an Alabama, by a Georgia. LSU is good feels like every 2 to 3 years. You know, Tennessee kind of really reemerged last year, but then, all of their best players, it feels like, left, and now they're, kind of trying to maintain it, but they need to get some more consistency there at the quarterback position.
yeah,
So this does feel like a year where maybe Ole Miss, they can keep this up if Dart can, continue to play well. Maybe they steal a game here that they're not expected to win, and things could get interesting there in the SEC. But I Tulane was without their starting quarterback, and they were able to hang in there. So that doesn't give me true confidence about Ole Miss being able to knock off a Bama, LSU, Tennessee, or Georgia level team. But you never know. I mean, college football is crazy.
yeah. No, for sure. All right, sticking in that SEC, you mentioned Texas A&M. They lost. No shocker. 48-33 in Miami. I was interested in this game because I wasn't sure how good or bad either team is, and maybe we still don't know that because we're not quite sure of how good either of these teams still are. But I was expecting more for Texas A&M. I thought they were going to come out and win this. They have the talent. They have Connor Wyman, who I felt like is doing a pretty good job at quarterback, and I think they threw the ball too much with him. And I think this is something we talked about last year in the podcast. I think the last 2 years on the podcast, that Texas A&M has had these nice running backs, and they don't use them. And I think that was the case again, or maybe they could have run, but Connor went for 53 passes in this game and for 336 yards, 2 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions. I just think you have a good offensive line, at least from a star perspective. And you have like the number one running back from high school last year, Ruben Owens, who only got 5 touches for 7 yards. And he has some other good ones like Mar Daniels and you just you couldn't run the ball. So I don't know if this is a scheme or they want to be a complete passing team, but you're not going to win, especially in the SEC being a complete passing team. Miami, on the other hand, I was wondering, like, they beat Miami, Ohio last week, but it's Miami, Ohio. I didn't know how their offense would be, and they played well. I mean, Tyler Van Dyke, you can see why Alabama went after him. He had 374 yards, 5 touchdowns. They ran the ball pretty well with Henry Parrish with 10 carries, 50 yards, and then another stable of guys there. And then obviously they got some good play out of their wide receivers, which they didn't get last year at all. So I think Mario Cristobal has that team moving in the right direction. They are luckily that the ACC is down this year, so maybe they'll be one of the top contenders this year because of that downness of the ACC. So any takeaways for you in this game?
That Tyler Van Dyke looked really, really good. I mean, 21 of 30 for 374 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was clutch when he needed to be, particularly at the end there when he was able to hit Jacoby George 64 yards. He just put that right on the money there, and that just iced the game. Texas A&M, I think everybody on the pod picked them to win this game. I mean, I know Jordan and I did, because I
Yep.
was like, if they figured some stuff out on offense there, then they have the talent. Like, it's not like they are bereft of talent.
Yeah.
But what none of us were expecting, I don't think any of us were expecting, a 48-33 kind of score. Maybe like a 35-31 kind of game, maybe a 31-23, something like that. But I was not expecting it to be as high scoring as it was. Miami did look good. They won the Confusion Bowl last week. It's an awesome name for the game, by the way. I love that. And then they came out here, and again, they did what they needed to do. And this really felt like a week where if you had the better quarterback, your team won. That tends to be a bit more of the case in the NFL, where everybody who makes the league, regardless if they're a bum in the league or not, they are one of the best football players in the entire world. You're in college football, and yeah, these guys were some of the best high school players, but they're not going to the next level. They're going to be an accountant or something,
Yeah.
even on some of the best teams in the country. You got guys that they're just not going pro. So there's a little more like, if you just maybe got some better just overall talent around you, even if your quarterback isn't great, you can still find ways to win and get these upsets and everything. But I'm not saying it's super common, but it just, this week it's like, if you had the better quarterback, your team won.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of these guys are really separating themselves. Tyler Van Dyke, who knows where he's going? Maybe he's a mid-round pick in the NFL. Wouldn't surprise me. But it's I really don't have much to add on to that.
Yeah.
Better quarterback, you win the game. Most important position, and you got the better guy. So
Yep. No, for sure. Um, I am wondering how Jimbo will manage the rest of the season. If they lose a couple more games, he might be definitely on the hot seat again.
I was gonna ask
Um,
you think there's a shot Fisher gets fired?
contract. I mean, every year it gets a little lower, so maybe if they want to spend that much money to fire him, but you gotta see like a 9-3 type season for them. That way they're at least moving in the right direction. If you don't, I don't see how they can keep him. I mean, they're just going to continue to get worse and worse. So, um, all right, moving on. Obviously, the team everybody's talking about, Colorado. So Colorado won 36-14 of Nebraska. This was an ugly game for Nebraska. Jeff Sims is not the right guy at quarterback. I don't know if they have the right guy at quarterback on this roster yet for Matt Rule. But Jeff Sims, fumbles some balls, interceptions, really gave opportunities for Colorado to score some points here. I think that their first half was 13-0 Colorado. I mean, Nebraska just, I mean, they played pretty good defense that first half, but their offense kept letting them down, and then that finally caught up with them, and Colorado was able to pull away with that 36-14 win. Um, again, you talked about Shadir Sanders. He had another good game of 393 yards, 2 touchdowns. Their running backs came back down to earth a little bit. Dylan Edwards only had the 55 yards. Wide receiving, Travis Hunter only had the 3 catches this time. I think, Nebraska, obviously, we talked about it. Nebraska would have a pretty good defense compared to what TCU had, and that showed it. It scored as many points. And honestly, I think they would even score less if that Nebraska offense would have gave it up as many times as they did. So, any thoughts here on Colorado as they move forward as the America's team is what they're being called now? So,
That they are. I'm impressed. Like, again, as I said earlier, TCU and Nebraska, they're not some cupcakes, they're decent teams, they're Power 5 teams. Not like, again, it's not like they went out there and beat Alabama like Texas did, or they went out there and played an LSU like FSU did last week, but they're solid enough teams. They've got some talent, TCU in particular. We were expecting to be a ranked level team, not what they were last year, but I think a lot of people still had them being a decent team, top 25 level. Colorado, I mean, Shedeur Sanders, he looks terrific. He's not turning the ball over. They're comfortable enough to have him be throwing the ball 40 plus times a game. He's on pace, as I said earlier, to shatter the Colorado single season passing record by over 2,000 yards. It's only 2 games, but still. They've got talent. They're doing what they need to do. Another game, better quarterback, team wins.
Yep.
You know,
I
pretty
am.
simple.
I'm surprised the game day is going to be there again next week.
They're gonna
When they
milk
play
this. They're gonna
when they
milk this
when they
for
play
all they got.
Colorado State, there's got to be a better game. I have to look at the games again, but there's got to be better in Colorado State. But hey, good for Colorado. Take advantage of this.
Mhm.
Get as much publicity and get as much recruits as you can in, and build that program quickly. Which is I'm showing Deion Sanders is doing that. So, all right, let's do a couple quick hitters here on a couple close games that happened yesterday, and that was the game between North Carolina and Appalachian State. Your neck of the woods there. You probably are familiar with these teams more than I am.
Yeah.
But they ended up being a really close game with the double overtime. I thought App State was going to win, but then North Carolina State had a chance to win it in regulation. They missed a field goal. App State then scored. And then in the second overtime, North Carolina missed their 2-point conversion. I really thought App State had it then, but they couldn't quite get it done. So that happened. And then the ever close game was Oregon and Texas Tech. Oregon won 38-30. This was a close game again. I think Texas Tech at one point, had almost a 10-point lead, and then Oregon just took it over in the fourth quarter. But I was impressed with Texas Tech. They could have folded in this game. They lost the first game to Wyoming, and they came out. And this is the team I think most people saw when they were predicted Texas Tech to possibly win the Big 12. So hopefully this gives us some positive momentum going into the Big 12 season. Oregon, they're kind of up and down. They scored 81 points last week, but came back down to earth a little bit against better competition this week. So I'm not quite sure what Oregon is, be honest. So any thoughts on those two particular games?
Yeah, one, Drake May did not look particularly great
No.
against App State, but App State has always been this weird team where going back to 2007 when they upset Michigan, it's like they're gonna face these big time ranked opponents, and they're gonna come to play. You can never truly just write them off on your schedule going into the season. But we kind of knew going into this year that one of the things we were saying is like North Carolina can be good. They've lost a lot of that talent, which is concerning. But if Drake May can take those next steps, they should be able to be one of the top teams in the ACC just because they've got what many people would say is the second best quarterback in football, in college football. As for the Oregon game, I mean, I'd sign up for my coming down to earth being a 31-point outing for my offense and then a pick six to ice the game, makes it 38. That's still a pretty darn good scoring game there. But yeah, no, Texas Tech, I mean, the difference there was the turnovers. I mean, Tyler Show had 3 interceptions, including the one that turned into the pick six that iced the game. And then I know a lot of people are, I think this was the game where it's like the controversial, should it have been pass interference in the last Hail Mary, which it should have been. To me, I saw when I watched it, it looked like it was. So
they tend not to call that though in those type of plays, but yeah, I agree. It should have been called.
So my Texas Tech should feel, honestly, I think they should feel, kind of good leaving this game. Oregon is one of the better teams in the country. They've got a ton of talent all over that field, from Troy Franklin at wide receiver and depending on how you feel about Bo Nix. He seems to me he's going to be like one of those second, third round kind of quarterback guys in the draft. Depending on, what scouts feel, but, like you were able to contend with them. You were right there.
Yeah.
It's a rough start to the season though, and hopefully they can bounce back from it, but at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do, and they weren't able to execute in that final moment there. You learn from it, you move forward. Oregon, I think they got exposed a little bit, maybe defensively there. I don't.
Yeah.
Again, my standard for the Pac-12 is USC, much to your and Jordan's chagrin. There, not exactly your favorite team,
No.
but I think Oregon is still going to be one of the better teams in the Pac-12.
Yeah, they got the talent. Just got to keep continuing to work on it. First part of the year. All right, let's wrap it up with two games that were blowouts, but I just get their top 5 teams, so I think we should talk about them there. And first one, USC won 56-10. This is not as close as even that score sounds. It was 49-3 at halftime, I believe, and they just won a really big scoring spree. And I was impressed. I don't know if it's Stanford's offense or USC's defense, but USC defense did pretty well in this game compared to the other teams that they played. And then the other game was Georgia winning 45-3 over Ball State. I wasn't watching this game because I was Ball State, but when I saw it was 0-0 after one quarter, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then Georgia scored 31 points in the second quarter to kind of blow this game out. I will say I'm not really that impressed so far with Carson Beck. He was 23-30 for 283, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. He, to me, is still. I think he looked a little like Kyle McCord in that first game. He's still stiff. He's not like I'm used to Stetson Bennett be able to be a little more mobile in the pocket and get out and find open receivers, make some room for himself. So not quite that, but he could develop into that. It's his first couple games. You're probably a little nervous. This is your team now and all that kind of thing. So did you learn anything from these blowouts yesterday?
No.
All right. And that's the podcast, guys.
So, I mean, it was a little concerning for Georgia there that it was 0-0 after one, but I mean, the lines for these games was like they were 40-point favorites. It feels again like my thoughts on this is the same way I feel about Ohio State versus Youngstown State. They did what they needed to do for Georgia. It was a little concerning there that they couldn't score in the first quarter, but there's nothing really to take away from these games, in my opinion. As long as there were no key injuries and they won by 40, they did what they needed to do. Let's move on.
Yep. Nope. Totally agree. All right. Well, let's wrap it up with this. Who's your current? If you say it's the best team playing right now, like if you had to say like all facets of the game, offense, defense, special teams, who do you have right now? Is this your current like number one team?
Probably Michigan. I mean,
And we didn't talk about them because they haven't played anybody yet, so we haven't talked about them. But yes,
hey, they
oh,
absolutely played
they
somebody.
played a very tough East Carolina team this week. So
yeah, you're darn right. I mean, we got our teeth kicked in by Marshall, and I'm not very happy about that. Mason Garcia looks like an excellent Russian quarterback, though. But no, Michigan, they look very complete, and the only reason that I'm putting them above Georgia is, JJ McCarthy versus Carson Beck. And JJ McCarthy, he looks a lot more comfortable. This is a system he's much more familiar with. He's been the starter. So he's got the game experience. Carson Beck, needs to develop that. But yeah, no, I mean, if Beck doesn't develop, this does feel like a chance for Michigan. I'm not as sold on Ohio State. I mean, if McCord develops into some top guy, I'd say they're up there. But teams like USC, teams like FSU, Oregon, all these other guys, it's a little bit more about, either depth or defense or something.
Yeah.
Georgia and Michigan, I think, are the two most complete teams in college football, top to bottom roster wise. But Michigan's got the better quarterback as it stands.
Yep. No, I agree with that. I think JJ McCarthy quietly is putting together some good performances. I just want to see it against someone with the pulse. So that probably won't happen
Yeah.
for like 8 more weeks. I think. I don't know. They have a terrible schedule, so it's going to be a while till they play Penn State and Ohio State. So, because even Wisconsin, they're not going to. I think they had them on the schedule, but I don't think Wisconsin's going to be as big of a challenge as I thought. So, we'll see.
Michigan's first real test isn't going to be until the third to last week of the season when they play at Penn State on November 11th. They've got Bowling Green next, then they host Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan State, and they look like they've got a bunch of issues going on right now. I think didn't something come out about their coach? Was that
sexual harassment investigation? Yeah.
Then they get Purdue on November 4th, and then it's at Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State, who, those might be the three best teams in the Big Ten right there, depending on how Maryland can put things together.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean it's what a slate there for Michigan. I don't know how they're going to make it through. Yeah, I mean I think this team is great, but I think the defense is really good, but they're not going to be challenged. That's my concern. They're going to go to Penn State having not been challenged by a really good offense. And what are they going to be? I just wonder, like, is it going to be too late in the season for them to make adjustments because they haven't been through that? For their sake, I hope somebody gives them a game because I think they need that to be challenged later in the season. That way they don't kind of fold under that pressure. But hey, no, I agree. I think right now Michigan, Georgia probably have the best talent rosters and are probably Michigan's probably playing a little better than Georgia right now just because of the quarterback situation. So
at least
something to keep an eye on.
I know we were talking smack about Georgia, but I mean, at least they've got a Tennessee in the middle of their season.
Yeah, no, they do. But
Being said,
even I don't think they're that great this year. So, and again, they probably won't be challenged till later in the season.
Yeah.
So.
Also, I guess at the end of the day, Michigan gets Ohio State and Penn State. Tennessee is Georgia's only potential challenge.
Yeah, up to the SEC championship game. So, and even then, I don't know how big of a challenge Alabama would be this year. Honestly, to be totally truthful. So, all right, we'll keep an eye on that. As always, guys, if you have anything, if you want to any mailbag questions you want to have us go over on this week's upcoming podcast, we'll be doing another podcast probably towards the Wednesday, Thursday time frame. So if you have anything you would like to hear from us, answers to any of your questions, feel free to write us on in the Flat Pod on X or Twitter, and then via our website, intheflatpodcast.com. And until next time, guys, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.